Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. I got a call yesterday from John Katzimatidis' radio show asking if I could comment on censorship in social media. John Katzimatidis is a Republican with connections high in the Democratic and Republican Party establishment. Katzimatidis is an extremely successful businessman. He started the Red Apple supermarket chain in one of the hardest markets in the world, Manhattan. And he took the money he made from that small grocery empire and built it into a successful investment fund. What's more, John Katzimatidis once ran for mayor of New York City as something impossible, a Republican. We don't elect Republican mayors in New York. What did John Katzimatidis want to talk to me about on air? John is convinced that social media is riddled with censorship. In fact, he feels that social media censorship poses a threat to conservative voices like his and a threat to the United States. And John seems to agree with one of the major funders of the pro-Trump right, Rebecca Mercer, who lashes out at what she calls the ever-increasing tyranny and hubris of our tech overlords. More about Rebecca Mercer in a minute. What makes the question of censorship in the social media topical? What makes it relevant right now? Two headline items. Facebook is being sued by the Federal Trade Commission and 48 state and territorial attorneys general. The charge is that Facebook is building a monopoly. The charge is that Facebook is killing the competition, either buying its competitors up the way that Facebook bought Instagram and WhatsApp, or destroying the companies that refuse to sell. As Wired magazine puts it, the nub of the case is that Facebook built and maintained a monopoly largely through anti-competitive acquisitions. Are these allegations true? Not as Facebook's COO Sheryl Sandberg sees it, that's Chief Operating Officer. Says Sandberg, I think it's really hard to make the argument that we don't compete, and compete hard for your time and attention. She added an example. I can't get my own kids to post on Instagram, she said, because they're so busy on Snapchat and TikTok. But that doesn't matter. The right wants to carve up Facebook as revenge for allegedly censoring those who support an underdog, a poor baby, named Donald Trump. And the left wants to humble Facebook because it is big, successful, corporate, and capitalist. Then there is item number 2. Donald Trump wants to take revenge on Facebook, Google, and Twitter for failing to act as his propagandists. He is attempting to mete out this punishment by canceling Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. That act protects the social media platforms from being sued over content posted by their subscribers. This is the sort of protection a phone company receives from being sued by someone who hates a few sentences you've uttered on a call. If Section 230C goes down, freedom of speech on the internet goes down too. And that's exactly what Donald Trump wants. He wants to be able to sue Twitter, Facebook, and Google into submission. He wants to set up an unspoken ultimatum. If you allow any messages criticizing me on your platform, I will sue you into bankruptcy. President Trump has made this assault on freedom of speech by attaching an amendment to the Defense Appropriation Act, the $740 billion act that funds the military. The Trump amendment calls for the annihilation of Section 230 protections, and Trump has threatened to veto the Defense Appropriations Act if it fails to contain his annulment of Section 230. Fortunately, a mass of Republican and Democratic senators have come together, a mass big enough to override President Trump's veto and render him powerless on this. At heart, Donald Trump is trying to stifle criticism of his deeds, and he is trying to force social media and the press to praise his deeds and to repeat his accusations against his enemies. Donald Trump is trying to muzzle freedom of speech, but that's not how Katzimatidis and his fellow Trump supporters see it. To them, it is Trump's freedom of speech that is under fire, and the speech of members of what the Trump family calls its Trump army. The president tweeted on December 8th that Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act is a serious threat to our national security and election integrity. In fact, Donald Trump frequently confuses his personal security and the security of the nation, since in his mind he is the nation, and the nation is him. Anything that gratifies his ego enhances the security of the United States in Trump's mind. And anything that attacks his sense of security is a threat to America and to America's democracy in Donald Trump's impoverished little mind. Why is Donald Trump suddenly attacking the tech and social media giants? Why is he making this strenuous effort to punish Facebook and to get rid of Section 230? Why is Donald Trump assaulting freedom of speech? Conservatives and Trump supporters are spooked. Even good-hearted Republicans like John Catsimatidis are afraid. WND, one of the first major right-wing online newspapers, claims that, quote, an endless stream of conservative, Christian, and pro-life organizations have been banished, censored, shadow banned, and demonetized by big tech and mainstream social media platforms. WND claims that the communist and socialist radical left, that would be me, is trying to turn the United States into a totalitarian dictatorship. That's a strange accusation. It's an act of projection. You could easily argue that it's Donald Trump and his supporters who are trying to install a totalitarian dictatorship, a dictatorship with a dynasty at its head, the Trump dynasty. Look how hard Trump and his supporters are working to overturn the presidential election of 2020. And look how many commentators and historians believe that this attempt is the greatest assault on our democracy since the Civil War. In other words, the Trump supporters' claims of censorship are phony. How do we know? Look at these facts. The most read posts on Facebook each day are overwhelmingly from conservative sources. They come from Trump, Fox, and conservative commentator and radio personality Dan Bongino. So Facebook is one of the most powerful platforms the Trump supporters have. What's more, Twitter is the primary media platform for the Trump family and for conservatives and Trump followers. Conservatives with active Twitter accounts include Donald Trump Jr., Lara Trump, Melania Trump, Ivanka Trump, Kayleigh McEnany, and Trump's frequent enabler in the Senate, Mitch McConnell. In other words, the Trump clan holds more sway on Twitter and Facebook than anyone else on earth. Then there are Twitter's labels saying that Trump messages are false, misleading, or disputed. Are these labels censorship? Not at all. They add information. They don't subtract from it. And a very strange thing happens to Trump tweets that Twitter labels with warning labels. Reports the Washington Post tweets by Trump with warning labels spread more than tweets by the president without warnings. So Twitter's warning labels do Donald Trump a favor. But there is an element of truth to the Trump supporters' claims of censorship. It's true that if you search frequently for news stories on Google about any political topic you pick, most of your hits will come from sources like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Slate, all liberal outlets. Very few hits will come from Fox News, and none at all will come from Newsmax, OAN, or Breitbart. Not a single one. Since I pay a lot of attention to conservative sources, this is frustrating. It makes me wish there were an alternative search engine for Trump-loving media. But the biggest censorship threat on the internet is not Facebook, Twitter, or Google. It's Donald Trump. As I said, if Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is rescinded, social media will be forced to impose censorship. Otherwise, it will be pounded into bankruptcy by big suers like Trump. Donald Trump is trying to censor Facebook and Twitter. What's more, conservatives rail against the mainstream media as if it were the only media America has. That's not true. The Trump loyalists have a rich media ecosystem of their own. Right-wing news outlets include Fox News, Newsmax, OAN, The Daily Caller, Breitbart, WND, The Washington Times, The Wall Street Journal, and Parler. not to mention nearly all of talk radio, including heavy hitters like Mark Levin and Rush Limbaugh. This is not censorship. Far from it. When it comes to information, this is a free country. Fox, for example, has been the highest rated cable news outlet on American TV for years, often outdoing CNN and MSNBC combined. That is the opposite of censorship. Meanwhile, do you ever hear the Trump supporters call for more liberal voices on Fox or Newsmax? Do you ever hear them decrying the suppression of liberal points of view on the station of Hannity, Laura Ingraham, and Tucker Carlson? No. The Trumpists' only complaint is about the mainstream media. The Trump supporters are not really calling for freedom of speech. They are calling for all Trump all the time in all the media. But there's more. The right-wing media is supported by a rich pool of trolls. Reports the New York Times' Kevin Roose, pro-Trump political influencers have spent years building a well-oiled media machine that swarms around every major news story, creating a torrent of viral commentary that reliably drowns out both the mainstream media and the liberal opposition. If you have made political comments on Facebook like I have, you know that fact is very true. I certainly do. Just read the comments from trolls on my Facebook or YouTube pages. Then there's Parler, a social media platform co-founded by heiress to superwealth Rebecca Mercer, who helped bring you Breitbart and Steve Bannon. Mercer co-founded Parler to counter that, quote, ever-increasing tyranny and hubris of our tech overlords, close quote, you heard her complain about a few minutes ago. Parler is a platform designed for pro-Trump voices. It's a space where conspiracy theorists who believe the world is about to be taken over by globalists led by George Soros, Hillary Clinton, and Bill Gates can go crazy. It's a platform where people can preach that Donald Trump is a savior sent by God and that he is the only Messiah who can break the hammerlock of the worldwide coven of child rapers and Satanists, like, of course, Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi. In other words, Mercer has bought into the phony claim that big tech companies are throttling conservative speech. How is Parler doing? It hit high numbers of participants during the election, but has faded a bit since then. For example, on November 14th, Fox News economist Maria Bartiromo said she would leave Twitter for Parler. As of December 11th, she was still on Twitter. Why? Because Twitter and Facebook, despite all the complaints from the right, are the aircraft carriers transporting pro-Trump messages in massive quantities. Let's go back to the right wing's outcry against the mainstream media. Says WND, a virulently pro-Trump online publication, quote, big tech is attempting to reshape, indeed recreate, America in its far-left progressive image. Adds WND, multiple peer-reviewed studies show that Google has for years now been determining the results of elections worldwide. In other words, says WND, Google has been shoving liberal candidates down the throats of America's unsuspecting voters. Given the success of Donald Trump and conservatives on Twitter and Facebook, this is hard to believe. And given the success of Republican congressional candidates on November 3rd, it is impossible to swallow. However, a Pew Research Center survey conducted in June finds that roughly 3/4 of U.S. adults say it is likely that social media sites intentionally censor political viewpoints. And 90% of Republicans believe it's likely that social media companies censor views they don't like. So the perception of censorship is out there, especially among the Trump trolls who swarm people like me when we say anything that they do not like, and who sometimes turn that swarming into death threats. In other words, in my humble opinion, the biggest censors, the biggest destroyers of freedom of speech are the right-wing folks who claim that their voices are being stifled. Fortunately, 2 pro-Trump radio personalities have allowed me to express points of view like this one to large radio audiences. Those 2 are Coast to Coast AM's George Noory, who has me on at 1:06 a.m. Eastern Time every Wednesday night, and John Katzimatidis, whose invitation to speak on his show about the censorship and social media issue spurred me to do the research I am currently sharing with you. For that, I thank George and John. Both are Republicans, and both know that free speech means sometimes listening to people who disagree with you. But there's a fundamental reality underlying the right's protest against the major social media platforms and the mainstream media. A fundamental reality underlying President Trump's attacks on Section 230C and his administration's attack on Facebook, not to mention the implied threats against other tech giants like Google and Apple. Donald Trump and his chorus of worshipers do not want more freedom of speech. They want less of it. They want to cut out the tongues of the left-leaning press and social media. They want their opponents gagged, the way opposition voices are gagged in Vladimir Putin's Russia and in Xi Jinping's China. They want all of the press to provide a propaganda outlet for their beloved leader, Donald Trump. This is Howard Bloom speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. And now for that sneaky, sleazy, seditious, awfully, god-awful little off button.